everyone, it's Erica. Welcome back to Maniacal Reader. Long time no see. It's been about 3.5 weeks since I've seen you guys, but I have an explanation for that. I had an awful cold in the middle of October that lasted about 2.5 weeks, but I'm glad to be back. Today I'm doing my October wrap-up. I read a whopping number of 21 books this month. The first book I want to show you is Insurgent by Veronica Roth. This is the second book in her Divergent trilogy. I read this book about a month ago, and I still plan on doing a review of this trilogy. I liked it more than the first book because there was more action-packed things happening in this book, and it was just that much more exciting. It definitely elevated the trilogy to a new level. I wanted to take a break from the intensity of the Divergent trilogy, so I ended up picking something lighter. The Vincent Boys by Abby Glines. This is the first book in a new adult romance duology. It follows this girl named Ashton who's tired of living up to the expectations of her parents and her Prince Charming boyfriend Sawyer. That's probably why she finds herself spending time with Vincent Sawyer's cousin Beau while he's away for the summer. Beau has never been jealous of Sawyer and everything that he has, and he knows that Ashton is Sawyer's girl. But as he finds himself spending more time with her, when they rekindle their friendship turns into something more. I didn't really like this book. I think I gave it 2 stars. I found that the relationship between Ashton and Beau in this book sort of felt like insta-love to me, especially at the start of the book, because I felt like these characters didn't really have much of an emotional connection to each other, but as I read this book, I warmed up to their relationship. Next, I picked up the sequel, The Vincent Brothers. This book follows Sawyer's romance with Ashton's cousin, Lana. Since Sawyer's heart has been broken, he finds it hard getting over Ashton, but he finds himself growing closer to Lana. Lana has always liked Sawyer. So this sequel follows their romance. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked the romance in this book because I felt that the relationship developed more naturally than the previous book, and I guess I liked Lana as a character more than I liked Ashton, since Ashton was sort of like a bad girl and Lana is the quiet, inexperienced one. So I felt like I related more to her. We do get to see more of Ashton and Beau in this book, and they're more like a support to Sawyer and Lana's relationship. So it was nice to still see them in this book, even though the main focus was Sawyer and Lana's relationship. The next book I read was The Fifth Wave by Rick Yancey. This is the first book in Rick Yancey's Fifth Wave trilogy. This is a YA sci-fi dystopian book, and it's about these aliens traveling to Earth and them taking over the human race by decimating them and killing them over different waves. I read this book back in February, and I still really liked it. I realized upon rereading this book that I didn't necessarily have to, since details of the plot and characters came back, but I still definitely enjoyed this book a lot. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Naturally, I read the sequel, The Infinite Sea. This is the second book in the Fifth Wave trilogy. I also read this book back in February, and initially when I first read it, I felt like this book had filler content in it and not really a lot happened in this book in terms of the plot. But I did like this book more the second time around. I enjoyed the small interactions between the characters more at the start of the book. I also changed my opinion about Ringer's relationship with a guy named Razor in this book, and I found myself liking Ben a lot more in the second book, so because of that I changed my rating from 3 stars to 4 stars, even though I do realize that it did still have filler content. I still really enjoyed it. The Last Star. I borrowed this book from the library. This is the third and final book in the Fifth Wave trilogy by Rick Yancey. I enjoyed his book a lot more than the previous two books. There's a lot more action in this final book. I also enjoyed the change in format in terms of the writing style, where we get different characters' point of views within the sections of the book versus the previous two books that had each different section only being told by one character's point of view. I loved the action in this book and everything that happened. I ended up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars. The plot really took some interesting turns, but something happened at the very end that I wasn't expecting. This particular character's death at the very end, I felt happened with purpose and with meaning, so that's why I wasn't too disheartened at the end of this book. After reading The Vincent Boys Duology by Abby Glines, I wanted to check out her other series called the Rosemary Beach series, which I've heard so much about from other booktubers that I watch. The Rosemary Beach series is quite long. It has like 13 books total in the series, and I didn't want all 13 books taking up space on my shelf. I did have an old Kindle that I was using every once in a while, but it was old and clunky. It just wasn't a pleasant reading experience for me whenever I used to read ebooks. So I decided to pick up a new Kindle. This is a Kindle Voyage, and I read the Rosemary Beach series on this new Kindle. The first book I read was Fallen Too Far. This is the first book in the Rosemary Beach series, another new adult romance series. This book follows the romance of Rush and Blair. Blair has recently traveled from Alabama to Rosemary Beach because she needs help from her father since she's run out of money and she's become homeless, and she was in contact with her father prior to arriving to Rosemary Beach, and he said he would help her out. But when she gets to Rosemary Beach, she realizes that her father isn't there and that he's run off with his new wife in Paris for a vacation. So she has no idea what to do. But luckily, her stepbrother, her Rush, allows her to stay in the house and get back on her feet. Blair had no idea that he had a stepbrother, and so this is a surprise when he comes to Rosemary Beach. Blair and Rush don't really like each other at the beginning of the book, and they become friends, but eventually their friendship turns into something more. Blair is sort of an innocent person that doesn't really have a lot of experience with guys or friends, and Rush is like this rich guy who's the son of a rock star. They couldn't be more mismatched from each other, but they eventually realize that they fit well together. I loved their romance because they sort of hate each other at the beginning of the novel, but they grow to like each other as the novel goes on. Some interesting things happen near the end of the book which I didn't expect. Sort of rocks the foundation of Blair and Rush's relationship. The next book I picked up is Never Too Far. I really like the character development that happens in this book, particularly with Blair and Rush's relationship. I also loved Woods in this book. Woods is a friend of Rush, and he seems to be supportive of Blair and Rush's relationship despite the struggles that they're going through. Next, I read Forever Too Far, which is the third book in the Rosemary Beach series. This book sort of wraps up Blair and Rush's romance, and I really liked how this book ended. It was everything that I would have wanted for Rush and Blair's relationship. The next book I read was Rush Too Far. This is the fourth book in the Rosemary Beach series. It follows Rush's perspective of the events that happened in the first book, and since I really liked Rush, I definitely wanted to read this one. After reading the conclusion of Rush and Blair's relationship, I knew that different books in the series follow the romance of different side characters, and so I wanted to get back to the Divergent trilogy. I was disappointed by this book. I loved the first and second book in this trilogy, but certain events and certain details of things that happened in this book dampened my liking of this book. I plan on doing a review of this entire trilogy, so you'll hear more of my thoughts in that video. The next book I read was Twisted Perfection. This is the 5th book in the Rosemary Beach series. It follows Woods and his romance with a girl named Della. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I find that Woods and Della are so sweet together. I really enjoyed their relationship. The next book I read was the 6th book in this series, called Simple Perfection. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I liked it a little more than the previous book because more develops in Woods and Della's relationship. This book explores more of Della's past and certain things that she didn't know about herself. This book shows that Della can overcome her past on her own and really become her own strong person, separate from Woods. I also liked the fact that Tripp was supportive of Woods and Della's relationship, and he's a really good friend to Della in this 2nd book. The next book I read was Take a Chance. This is the 7th book in the Rosemary Beach series, and it follows the romance of Grant and Harlow. Grant is the brother of Rush, and Harlow is the daughter of another rock star in this series. I liked Grant in the previous books. He's been likable and funny, but I did have problems with him in this book. Grant has always liked Harlow, but he's scared to get in a relationship with her because he doesn't want to love her completely and then lose her. Rush convinces him to finally take a chance and give his relationship with Harlow a shot. I also thought that the pairing of Grant and Harlow happened too quickly. I didn't really feel that there was a connection between them in the beginning, but as I continued reading the book, I warmed up to their relationship. I also liked finding out more about Harlow, since not a lot of her is mentioned in the previous books in the series, so this was my first chance at getting to know her. I did enjoy this book, but I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars, since it took me some time to warm up to Grant and Harlow's relationship. The next book I read was One More Chance. The previous book left off on a cliffhanger, and there were some things that had happened to sort of jostle Grant and Harlow's relationship, but I loved this book. I realized that Grant and Harlow did really have a connection to each other, and I liked seeing how they handled the developments that come up. Next up, I read You Were Mine. This is the 9th book in the Rosemary Beach series, and it follows the romance of Tripp and his romance with a girl named Bethy. Bethy is Blair's best friend. Tripp and Bethy had a romance before this book in the series, but Tripp left town. Now he's back, and he wants to start a new relationship with Bethy, but because of things that have happened to her, she's also hesitant to start up a relationship with him again because of the past that they share. So this was an interesting book, but I loved seeing their relationship in the past as well as their evolving relationship in the present. I really liked their romance. I'm glad that Bethy got her happy ending in this book. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. This book has everything that I could have wanted for Tripp and Bethy. The next book I read was actually a novella called Kiro's Emily. Kiro is the father of Harlow. He's one of the other rock stars in this book. It follows Kiro. Kiro is another member of this rock star group that's featured in this series. He's also Harlow's father. This novella talks about his romance with Harlow's mom named Emily. Reading this novella helped me understand this character in the series a lot more. The next book I read was When I'm Gone, the 10th book in the Rosemary Beach series. This book follows a guy named Mace and his romance with a girl named Reese. Mace is Harlow's half-brother, and he's also Kiro's son. Mace was raised on a ranch in Texas by his mom and his stepfather, so he has no connection with Kiro's rock star world, and he doesn't really have a good relationship with his father. Mace is staying at his sister Nan's house over the summer since Nan has gone off to Paris. While he's staying at this Rosemary Beach house, Reese is the cleaner. They start up a friendship over the phone since Mace doesn't really live in Rosemary Beach and he has a life in Texas. Their romance soon develops into something more. I loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It developed so slowly and sweetly, and it was so genuine. Reese had some awful things that happened in her past, and because of that, Mace doesn't really want to push her into doing anything that she's not ready for. Just everything about this book was sweet, and it was really good. The romance in this book developed how I would want all romances to develop. It was that good. The next book I read was When I'm Back. This book follows more of Mace and Reese's relationship. This book explores a little more of the ups and downs in Mace and Reese's relationship. Reese finds her own identity separate from Mace in Texas, which I thought was really good and important for her personal growth, so I enjoyed that part of the novel. The next book I read was The Best Goodbye, and it follows the romance of a guy named Captain. Captain is Blair's half-brother, and his romance with a girl named Rose. I felt that the romance in this book developed a little too quickly, in my opinion. I enjoyed seeing the history of Captain and this girl named Rose, who he used to know from his past. The last book I read in October was Up in Flames. This book follows a girl named Nan and her romance with 2 different guys. Nan is the bitchy sister of Rush, and she's the character in this series that causes all kinds of problems. Rush is the only character who really understands her and cares for her. The other characters in this series really hate Nan, write her off as a bitch, since she causes problems for nearly every character in this series. I was disappointed by this book. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. This book didn't really turn out the way I was expecting, and I didn't really expect a love triangle. The insta-love between Nan and this guy named Gannon wasn't realistic or believable at all. I thought they just had a purely sexual relationship. The reason why this is a love triangle is because a guy named Major, a character from previous books in the series, really likes Nan, but Nan doesn't feel the same way about him. And I really liked Major from previous books in the series, and he seemed like the more realistic character, a character that cares about people a lot and is in touch with his emotions. Nan didn't really have any redemption with any of the other characters in the series and didn't really have a chance to redeem herself in any of the other characters' eyes, or a chance for the other characters in the series to view her differently. This book was just completely off for me, and I had higher expectations for it. I always knew that she had a heart, and unfortunately, the other characters in this series didn't really get a chance to see her heart. Those are all of the books that I read in October. Hopefully my thoughts on them didn't make this video too long. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts in detail about each book, I'll put a link to all of my Goodreads reviews down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this wrap-up, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye!